Lodrö Thaye Dendra Nyedra Namda Rapsarave Chinye Jamgön Chechen Seshere Nije Tugra Levam Zay Kondai Sebe Tönrer Mare Mendam Dunge Chezeve Rotsoi Konlai Puche Tarze Yenlai Joje Yongten Song Dodare Chedro Nyamon Yenong Leje Chadron Ronze Jen Mare Mesre Dungra Nyogo Chenye Chenze Rajenam Dene Tajen Saju Tarse Yenden Luzo Jase Tuko Chödrak Chödan Chönyi Jende Dale Mes Jambe Yong Lai Du Zedene Cheche Chenra Vesreche Dale Demo Memba Rapsalane Gadan Denje Yonglo Tokwaye Lodrö Popen Nongwa Zardo So Namda Todem Serge Saje Den Tenzen Bamer Inge Venze Sherab Nide Nongwe Chöken Sol Tumjon Drove Lama Shage Yor Rokum Chesi Zongwe Pashin Le Zongbo Jeve Chöyin Göntam Gelbe Yaptı Chokchon Jase Churu Nave Singe Cheme Lodrö Churu Rikum Saben Mendro Dambesi Remin Lamje Lobro Tema Jong Deshin Kujen Rebu Tenzepe Yangze Lama Jubra Chela Endu Chödong Chöjen Nelo Manur Vara Chejen Zigne Chembe Yesheje Rokum Siye Patrava Rigbudoje Shavla Shaje Lasso Tene Sambashon Choto Tukjepa Saltablo Nang.
So please begin by generating the body mind.
Tene Ta Lanzo Shue Del Hatong Shue Tabri Tlatong Ju Tlatong Namye Tlatong Ngo Deni Chedar Gambe Sul Nambrayewa de subject Tongpon Rosane Tanda subject Sombe Kaptere.
So the segment in the Treasury of Knowledge which sets forth Vipassana has 5 divisions. The first is that of the prerequisites for Vipassana. The second lists the particular types of Vipassana, and the third is the classification according to the essential nature of Vipassana, the method itself or the methods that make for this type of practice. And we're in the process of going through the third of these first 3 divisions.
Da subject Sambatella Sumri.
And as has been explained earlier, this division has another 3 subdivisions.
Te Sumta Kararesana Nambaran Jepa Singita Tangori.
And the first of the 3 subdivisions explains about how the practitioner can't remember which how the practitioner discerns or look into or distinguishes the various perspectives of objects of knowledge.
That teaching on the yurt number T Kari yimin la Sherabke number ye go yarwa ngaras Sherabke.
Julgi nampa sungerwa, da nampa dramin rajongerwa
Yeah.
So an object of knowledge will have a number of perspectives. And here it's about understanding these perspectives, their function, their meaning, and so on. And this can be done on the basis of so-called higher knowledge. Knowledge categorized as higher in that it is more profound than the regular worldly intellect. The capacity of so-called higher knowledge is higher than the capacity of the regular worldly intellect in terms of understanding and acquiring knowledge and insight of these various perspectives.
Penna number je be Sherab the mena. Dizo kanga tongba ni reda sedu. Penna chokzen the tongba ni reda selobda. Ya chokzen the tongba ni samne dia chejre mato. Kayang anzu lor chartu bumindowa.
Consider the explanation you find in Buddhism about objects of knowledge, such as a table. The information is that the so-called table or any other object of knowledge, outer object of knowledge, has no real reality. It is empty of a real reality. It's referred to as emptiness in terms of the perspective we call the true nature of the object. Now, an individual who has not made efforts to develop so-called higher knowledge, his only resource is the regular worldly intellect. And if an individual were to try to understand this information, the information that objects of knowledge do not have a real reality, are empty of a real reality, the regular worldly intellect would not have the capacity to process that information so that it is understood properly. A regular person in the world who has been told this would be able to, at the most, think the thought, the table in front of me is empty of a real reality. But that regular worldly individual would have no understanding beyond that thought, no understanding of how the table is empty of a real reality, and so on and so forth. And that's where so-called higher knowledge becomes the medium for acquiring a more profound knowledge of how, and so on and so forth, the table and all other things are empty of a real reality. So it's not just a statement which the individual thinks in the shape and form of a thought, end of story, because that won't bring about any progress, as it were, in terms of getting to know what so-called emptiness is.
Penna nganso la number je be sherap de mena number je pandela lo kamma tumna che number so nge shu she marwa ngaran da ji le chatsuna pen jinres gamba yina jinres ge number ji sem de che ne duji ma jinres ge zorum du yong du dong chun she ni do nam je sherap de mena nam je sherap de yuen na
Du tang di shege men du song du.
다 두탕데 페나 제레스 파시 야바라고 마토 원네티 게르산 로투문도와
So
남쪽 시험지에 나 automatic 감투문도와
you see, there is higher knowledge which, on the basis of analysis, the second perspective of the fourth and additional method in the list of methods that have been listed before. Today we are dealing with analysis. Yesterday investigation was explained. Today we're dealing with analysis. Now, in terms of analysis in the context of higher knowledge which analyzes objects of knowledge further, that is to say, in a more subtle fashion than during the first and previous subdivision. Here, in terms of emptiness, and knowing emptiness on a profound level, that is to say, by way of so-called higher knowledge, here Khenpo Rinpoche gives the example of meditating on the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, Chenresi in Tibetan. Now, practitioners who have not yet acquired a measure of so-called higher knowledge would usually, in their meditation, as to the phase of the meditation where the practitioner generates the shape and form of the Bodhisattva Chenresi, in terms of creating a presence of the Bodhisattva in question. Most people who lack higher knowledge will do so on the basis of just a process of visualization, where in the mind's eye they paint a picture of Chenresi that resembles a painting of Chenresi, for example, or a photograph they may have of a painting. So the person who lacks, or the practitioners who lack higher knowledge, will go about the meditation in this way, because anything else is in fact beyond them, in that they have not yet developed a measure of so-called higher knowledge. And then you have the phase of this meditation, where the end phase of the meditation, where the practitioner, instead of primarily focusing on the Bodhisattva Chenresi, the focus shifts to emptiness. And one part of the end phase of the meditation is sort of to no longer refer to the Bodhisattva Chenresi as an object of meditation in the shape and form of Chenresi as depicted in a painting. So some people refer to this as the dissolution phase of the of the meditation and understand by the name of this phase, dissolution, that he or she is supposed to, in his mind's eye, gradually dissolve the previously visualized image, and then there is nothing left. Well, this is not emptiness. So he is there, according to the proper practice, the dissolution phase is to focus on the emptiness of what was meditated on, and to do so, to meditate on the emptiness of the object of meditation. And that is not synonymous with, in the mind's eye, sort of doing away with the previously visualized image.
Perna yurtang yurjin la.
And Khenpo Rinpoche also said he's not here claiming that this is how people meditate. However, I can add, in terms of him having had interviews and questions from many practitioners over many years, obviously this is how many understand these two phases of the meditation. But Khenpo Rinpoche, of course, also says, I can't read the practitioner's mind. However, based on the questions I have been asked regarding these two phases of meditation, this is what I've understood.
Perna number jebe sharab de yona yurdu yurjin ikala.
So the meditation, what is it made up of basically? It's made up of the meditator's mind, which meditates on an object of meditation, in this case.
De yona dene di sharab de la lo de thoma composition de la ngeshe yapo jin zhong na. Dene ngo tongpa xin yue sar le tata lebi ngure samgudo.
Ngo tongpa rangshin ösal yul shenicha.
Yeah.
You see, a practitioner who has trained so that a level of so-called higher knowledge has been acquired, would know how to go about these two phases of meditation. And so for that practitioner, the dissolution phase, for example, would be quite different. There, what happens in the mind of the meditator who has a degree of higher knowledge, he would rather than visually dissolving the image he has visualized, that's not how he would go about the meditation of this phase, and it's not meant that this phase of the meditation is about that only. The point of that phase of the meditation is to rest the mind in knowledge of the empty nature of the object of knowledge by way of enlightening knowledge, which here would then be synonymous with higher knowledge to a certain level, because of course there will be a variation depending upon the capacity of the practitioner. So the thing of doing away with a visualized image or dissolving mentally in the mind's eye, dissolving a visualized image is not what is at hand. Because this practitioner has trained in higher knowledge, which has looked into, which has discerned the various perspectives of both objects of knowledge and the mind itself. So this person would have a profound knowledge of how to go about these two phases of the meditation. So these two phases of the meditation are not reduced to a visualization phase followed by a dissolution phase made up of dissolving the visualized image. Just made up of, I should say, dissolving a visualized image.
Tante ngai minchi noriyo sari.
Kare noriyo sari?
Minchi noriyo te ngoni ki lathong se jinge xie songa.
Re?
Di yin sama re.
Aha.
Di yin sari. Gosum ji jesu chukpe lathong songa tin sari. Gosum ji lathong ne songdo an di yin sari.
Gosum di ngovuni gi shine erego.
Yin sari.
Gosum ka la lapne.
Yeah.
Apparently, there is a mistake again as to the terminology.
Nghe tên tên nó chú xóa xóa.
Det är när laktung giva sumredoga.
Yes.
Tene toppa dan köpa det sumredoga.
Ta remin do det där då. Ta det just en beslutet. Penna number jepa tangboche.
Ja.
Raptun jepa de nipa.
Nipa che.
Gosum gelatong de sumbarisha.
Gosum gelaktung ser du kanske.
Gosum gelatong singete ene gosum jonen jong.
Gosum kanske reona.
Gosum de.
Det mato selper rege men då det. Det ganska ngema det tre reda.
Ja, ngama de nordu singdo.
Nampar jepa, raptu nampar jepa tang tokchu. Det sum gosum re tre. Gjorde det nangla.
Kan det se?
Sa han anglar va? Jeva. Nampar jepa dan chik, raptu nampar jepa dan i, tokchu dang sum.
Mara.
Ini tranka shi tri tu ga ina det.
Tranka yete endere to metena. Number jepa, raptu number jepa ni je, ro.
Re.
Di ni la, di ni ge ngoi te che yong de.
Re.
Tokpa tang jepa ni de ye.
Tini shi re tu ga.
Ta di che tang ki chan xie ge do a. Latong ge tongye chan number jepa, raptu number jepa gosum je latong so to.
Oh dear me. Tene tokchu dang sum. Tene ngovoni kan la diar gogin du. Shi ina.
Number jepa, raptu number jepe ngo che la tokpa jepa ni
Tokpa dan köpa shireg.
Ja, det konsul ger grejer.
Tene tokpa dan köpa jul nimat om indu. Jul dan jul cheni.
Ni. Jul. Dan
Me danga selpu chago gindu ken.
det 차야게 단당에 세기도. jul라 julgung och segro.
Det du tokche peche tange yore tene ratto namba je du lola.
Tokche peche tange yore. Del ye.
Det la shire gemin dushi. Nge shudu. Kan resena. Yang mena nampar jepa danchik ratto namba jepa tang ni tokpa dang shi köpa dang tokpa dang sum köpa dang shi I gåne ngovoni la köpa ere teni shi yongen nuga changa shi Jamgön Lodrö Thaye
저런 게 이게 지당도 도전 리그멘도 우선비어네.
제 네디 칸데 쇼디
네 마세디기도.
라서
셰예테
레
율.
레 데이터 간소 레이츠아르 율단 율천이
다데 저런 카마자. 율라 제백갑라 니 율진라 제백갑라 니데 예.
톡추 체파
야.
Det sju inte mare som
저런 게 엔데스기도.
mare da nganso ngema kare yenade
딩마소.
tene shi gogen doga
야.
sum remin doga
숨데 가르스나 땡엔징게 고네 이에나 숨 제버지.
tabge gone yena shi
제수르게 찬네시네 예.
det tab sena digera
야, 제바 땅땅.
shetul dang tingsini
야.
tene ngovuni kava jar gogen do
오니 생게도 율징 오니 율징징 오니
da koso again we have to redo the classification that was redone yesterday. There should be, well, you see, this is a root text, so it can be confusing because it's not spelled out. All details are not spelled out. So the classification is into 4 types of vipassana. Discerning perspectives as to objects of knowledge, 1. Discerning perspectives, or rather further perspectives, further implying that here the object at hand to be discerned in terms of various perspectives is the mind itself. So that's number 2 in the list of 4. Then you have investigation and analysis, which has to do with the way in which you discern the various perspectives. Here, in terms of objects, you make use of, or the process is done, the process of discerning perspectives as to objects of knowledge is done on the basis of investigation and analysis. Number 3. Then, in terms of discerning the perspectives, the various perspectives of the mind itself, the process of discerning those perspectives is done on the basis of investigation and analysis. Number 4 in the list of 4. And then you have the 3 gateways mentioned in the root text. and they are about 3 types of samadhi. So the first, with the 4 types, is about a process of investigation and analysis. That's the meditation method. And in terms of the 3 gateways, you have 3 samadhis or stable meditation states, meaning various methods of formal meditation, as it were, in terms of acquiring insight of the true nature of both outer objects and the mind itself, as to the nature of all of them, the true nature of all of them. Is that clear?
Tapen andere gdwala sita. Cheji karesna thangpote yul raba.
So in terms of the process of discerning various perspectives as to outer objects of knowledge, here the basis for investigation and analysis is objects of knowledge, outer objects of knowledge. An example here would be the following. The table in front of me here, or the table in front of Khenpo Rinpoche, the table in question is an outer object of knowledge that can be used as a basis for investigation and analysis done with the aim of discerning, acquiring higher knowledge of what a so-called table in fact is. Regular people who are not concerned with this type of investigation and analysis see the table as a single, solid, real thing. End of story. That's the scope of the regular worldly intellect, a very limited scope from the viewpoint of Buddhism. Whereas a practitioner who has trained in higher knowledge would be aware of, or would know, or in the case of a beginner, would come to know on the basis of investigating what the so-called table is. On the basis of investigating this, he would find out, well, there isn't really a single solid thing, because this thing called a table has many parts. The tabletop, the 4 legs, and so on and so forth. So this person would be aware of that the table is not a single solid thing. He knows it's a collection of parts. And then there is the more subtle analysis of the so-called table, which goes further in terms of the practitioner acquiring knowledge of what a and here that would amount to, in brief, looking into what each individual part is in terms of what the part in question actually is, or in fact is, and on the basis of the instructions as to investigation and analysis, the practitioner would know the methods he is to employ. We're not going into those details a great deal because there isn't time to do so. However, by way of using these methods, it would become clear to the practitioner that the table isn't as real as he previously thought it to be, because in fact each and every part making for a so-called table is composed of innumerable subtle material particles, and there isn't a single material particle that isn't divisible, that can't be divided into yet smaller units. And as the case is that each building block of matter can be divided into smaller and smaller units in an infinite progression, it becomes clear to the practitioner in terms of him training in higher knowledge that the so-called table is empty of a real reality. It isn't real. By way of investigation, it appears the practitioner can reach the conclusion that the so-called table isn't a single solid thing, and by way of analysis, he also comes to see the emptiness of the object of question, emptiness in terms of there being no real reality. A real or an actual table is not at hand, which, as was explained yesterday, that emptiness this practitioner will know, as he is trained in higher knowledge, is not synonymous with the mere nothing or nothingness. There is still the manifestation we call a table that is perceptible, perhaps. However, the higher knowledge is knowledge of that what is at hand is not a single solid entity which has a real reality. So, on the basis of these processes, the practitioner is able to arrive at the conclusion.
Conclusion de chokze sanken dempachik meva ngeudo.
He's able to arrive at a definitive knowledge of the fact that the so-called table is neither a single thing nor a solid thing, and the so-called table does not have a real reality.
Yin a yang chila chik ten chokpa de chokpa chil ten no shargyo.
However, there is still the manifestation that the worldly mind calls a table, and the manifestation of it results from the synchronous meeting of many causes and conditions and their interaction, and that synchronous meeting and the interaction of these factors result in a manifestation that's perceptible. Now I forgot the very last. The manifestation, the worldly mindset labels table. So the absence of a real reality is not synonymous with nothing at all. It should be clear by now, I hope.
When I today get some standard, you carry young ko ngotong bata no one got me sharon ite.
So manifestations appear or manifest ceaselessly. There is no end to manifestations. However, in essence, these manifestations have no real reality, are essenceless, insubstantial, and unreal.
Hayina lodege della table segio della I segio della watch segiosen mereta dello tadere shedido.
However, the worldly mindset, the worldly regular intellect with its reduced capacity for profound knowledge, or rather its lack of capacity for profound knowledge, when coming in contact with these manifestations, immediately name them: table, eyeglasses, clock, and so on and so forth, and by way of the habit of the worldly intellect, it's presumed that the things one is in contact with are real, are single, solid, real things.
Then
we have the second of the two subdivisions here. No, it should be four, sorry. Of the four subdivisions, which also applies investigation and analysis as to what the mind in fact is. And there, the process of investigation and analysis, rather the methods used, are the same. In order to arrive at the same insight or conviction or definitive knowledge of the fact that the mind is neither a single solid entity, nor is it made up of a real reality of sorts.
The
mind, rather, in terms of its nature, is the union of emptiness and enlightening or illuminating knowledge. And on the basis of the practitioner persisting in using the methods at hand, investigation and analysis, a definitive knowledge of both what outer objects in fact are and what the mind in fact is can be achieved. And so masters of old who've attained a realization as to what was explained keep saying to their have been saying to their students, and those of today keep saying to their students, all objects of knowledge, outer objects of knowledge, are nothing but the union of appearance and emptiness, and as to the mind and its true nature, there is just the union of its empty nature known by enlightening knowledge.
Ngaranso nonchu kandechin shorgundu doeda. Ranjing tigela maya chene dramende chene de nonchu shordegi arwa.
Chetamirtan gimi
Nyamlempa nyamlempa ta tegarang gelpa de til ranjing chebrwa.
An authentic practitioner of the path will have used the methods described in brief to the point where he has arrived at a definitive knowledge as to what was explained, and once that has occurred, he's able to rest in mind's true nature. Regarding everyone else, their mistake is to not do or engage properly in the processes and methods that were just explained, because without doing so, the practitioner won't be able to do what the authentic practitioners do, namely see the empty nature of all objects of knowledge and know the empty nature of the mind on the basis of illuminating or enlightening knowledge. Yeah, so Khenpo is asking all of you who are listening digitally, did you get the point? Or the points, rather.
Number and jepa, rap number and jepa, singetella, some not done. That log tend to touch of a chansona. Yun non son you don't shepa salton son you la touch sona. That tea gela, then yamber jagu.
If you, by way of using the methods described, acquire higher knowledge of the fact that outer objects of knowledge are but the union of appearance and emptiness, and the mind that knows this is but illuminating knowledge, knowing the empty nature of the mind as well, then if you arrive at this point, what there is left for you to do is to simply rest in that state.
Then
next in the text, the author describes the so-called three gateways.
Shangchub Samba Pen Gombang Yendragon Doi Nantu, Shangchub Samba Shambaki Jamden de Chawatang.
There is the sutra Unraveling the Thought. Within and in this sutra, there is a description of the event of Chik Chambala Kandishure. There is a description of a conversation between the Bodhisattva Maitreya and Buddha Shakyamuni, where initiated by Maitreya asking Buddha Shakyamuni a question.
Toward Jamden des.
Dina gör det, va?
Gör det, det är trångjord.
Trångjord, ge fully examining, definitely examining. Oh dear. Maitreya. Classification. Threefold classification of Vipassana, known as the three gateways.
Jamgön des. Da latung la number 2 ores.
This conversation was initiated by Maitreya, who asked Buddha Shakyamuni the following. He began by addressing the Buddha, respectfully saying, "Oh Bhagavan, how many types of Vipassana are there?"
Da jamgön de length karna.
Dadi tingi gåneravat. Implied in terms of samadhis or stable meditation states.
Jamgön de length karna resna. Latung la yeba sum yongres.
Maitreya, the Buddha answered, there are 3.
당고 때 천만의 성을 하통 송아res.
The one arising from designations,
니빠데 용수 초르발의 성을 하통스.
the one arising from thorough investigation,
somebody 소스로 똑발의 성을 하통스.
and the one arising from individual analysis.
단데 당고디 탄다데다 가르송 비어스나 천마 세드.
So what is then a designation? What is meant by the word designation here?
다 다진슈슈들의 율탐제 농동 송주 임배
Yul tamche nongtong sungju kimpa.
임배 예반 롱 살네.
Impa. Rong tsamne.
되네 율라 담바여레 삼배 최치 다도 따와 마치 숨어져.
Yula dempa re chu la daktu tawa mache.
마치스.
Sangegi songre.
야 대신
Mache dangpu desena.
다데 줄이
야.
동보 다 옹엘랍.
Aha, okay.
대신도 율진로 생긴데 사tum 송죽 잠데 매파 타치 송아이나
Saltong sungjuk samle.
매파 타치 송아
Me partachena.
되네 공사가 다도 맞다 송아세.
So here Buddha Shakyamuni explains to Maitreya and all the other members of the audience at the time the following. In terms of the first type of Vipassana in this list of 3. Buddha Shakyamuni said to Maitreya and the other members of the audience, once you have arrived at a definitive knowledge of that all outer objects of knowledge are the union of appearance and emptiness, once you've arrived at the definitive knowledge of this, stop entertaining thoughts of a self or a soul of sorts within outer objects of knowledge. There being such a self or soul of sorts in terms of each and every outer object of knowledge. Do away with that notion, Buddha Shakyamuni said. He continued, saying the following: similarly, once you have arrived at a definitive knowledge of that there is nothing to the mind other than its empty nature known by illuminating or enlightening knowledge, and once you have arrived at that definitive knowledge, do away with the notion of an individual self, the Buddha said. So the designation here, as it were, is the designation of no self in terms of both outer objects and the individual. That is to be meditated upon.
That is saying the pen is sick that can't read that.
So the designation to be focused upon is no self, both in terms of objects and individuals, and a designation is a word by which a person or a thing is known. So the designation here is no self. So you know, you're supposed to know things out there by way of their no self, and you're supposed to know individuals by way of no self. And once this has been achieved in a definitive and certain manner, namely that the practitioner truly knows this, it's not a matter of, oh, I think it's like that. It's a matter of knowing it. It's not a matter of some sort of fuzzy, woolly type of acceptance of what you're told. It's a matter of knowing it yourself. Point made in saying this is, otherwise your practice won't work, because if you do not truly know this, it means that you have an idea of this, but an idea of something is not knowledge of that something. Therefore, when encountering various circumstances and perhaps when listening to opinions of others who have a completely different idea, you're influenced and so on, because you don't really know no self. You have an idea of it. But this of course, that will help you to some extent, but you're then a practitioner subject to falling back into opposite ideas by way of influence, for example, because you don't really know it. You're assuming that what you've been told is true, but you do not have a true personal knowledge of this fact.
Tendege tanla ngepa tin tsukbachi lepsuna tate yang do lo kamgo.
And once there is the act of truly knowing no self, then one has to familiarize oneself with no self to a higher and higher degree. And that's where a practitioner is recommended to take up residence in a place of solitude and focus upon his now certain knowledge of no self. But that is also not synonymous with having to take up residence in a mountainous area. That's not what's meant. What is actually meant is to take up residence in a place where disturbances caused by individuals of a worldly mindset are not at hand. That's what a secluded place means.
Penna page ina nyacharanga professor Sembaji kushabwa kun yuksa de delde jukde bare mesai jogiyo sa tongchetina yenna yang kusha Sembaji la todam nyama toli jukdo.
Now, Khenpo takes the example of Professor Senpaji, who recently passed away. He resided at the Karmapa International Buddhist Institute in New Delhi, the capital of India, for many, many years. Now, New Delhi is a city of 14 million people. So it's not secluded in the sense of it being a place where there are no other people. Not at all. It's a very crowded place. However, in terms of his residence and those living there, the focus of those living there at the Institute is that of the sacred Buddha Dharma on various levels and in various ways. And Professor Senpaji, who passed away about a week ago, was seated for 6 days in meditation upon death. So from this example, we can understand that a secluded place does not mean necessarily a place with no other people. It primarily is a reference to residing in a place not influenced by the world, such as a Buddhist institute, for example, which is the case here.
Penang against somebody, Lossum Sodu Moshi.
Khenpo Rinpoche knew Professor Senpaji for 34 years. And he relied upon him as a spiritual guide for about 20 years.
But chadung kesha singit chik chik komanyo pena.
And Khenpo Rinpoche reports that he has never known Professor Senpaji to even once have voiced words based in attachment and aversion, sort of controversies and strife and so on. There have never been conversations of that type between them.
Pena kazan kusha masha chenene kanang doga cancer go ta gena nyuji chapche se do ta kharsi du o ta che kan yo mare sung tu se ta na samdo chani shu cha je che na ba sung shu tim ma to kan dom go sung tu se
samdo chani shu cham je
ti gyun sin ji yu ji ro ya
travazola apparently just a short while before passing away, I mean, it was known that his life was about to come to an end. That had been established by the medical profession. And so those living at the institute, and he taught them on a regular basis, were asking him how he felt and so on, to which he had responded, well, I don't feel anything in particular. The only thing I would like you to do is to recite the Heart Sutra 28 times. That's all he said. Beyond that, I have nothing to say, he said. So, what we can learn from this example is that it's not a must to go into a mountainous area and stay away from contact with other people altogether in order to make progress. It's not absolutely necessary to do that. Of course one can do that, but it's not a must.
Varanasi Sanskrit University ki nande Lobjong Zebre, Professor Chavre, di jene Saranath Tibetan University nange Professor Re.
Now, Professor Senpaji, at a young age, took monastic ordination and went to Tibet, where he remained for very, very long, studying and receiving instructions from the spiritual guides of his monastery. Then, in effect of the Chinese invention, he went back to India. He was an Indian national. He was born and raised in India. He went back to India, and he, for many years, held the office of a professor at the Sanskrit University in Varanasi, as well as the Tibetan Buddhist University for Higher Buddhist Studies in Sarnath. So Professor Senpaji never really went into the mountains, as it were, but lived in populated areas. However, always in an environment of the sacred Buddha Dharma, not very much influenced by the world at all, in effect of which, as became clear to all who witnessed his passing, he achieved realization. Now, in terms of his early days in Tibet, there he lived in or the monastery he lived in was in a remote area, as it were, and a great deal of hardship was associated with his stay there, simply because he had no family members or relatives who could help him with the basic necessities of life. He had to take care of that himself in a foreign land. He studied a 10-year period in the well-known Tibetan Buddhist monastery Tashi. And you see, in Tibet, it's not like today. The monastics of a monastery had to find their own provisions. The food and the like wasn't provided by the monastic institution, so once or twice a year, or what was needed, the monastics had to go out and beg for supplies, which they then brought back to the monastery, and which made for their daily food supply. And of course, many of the Tibetan monastics would have family members in the neighborhood and stuff, so their families would help them with this, but someone like Professor Senpaji didn't have that. And he wasn't too happy about having to go out for too long a time to beg for food supplies, because that meant you had to walk by foot to one village after the other, and that was time consuming, which meant he missed many of the classes at the monastery. So he simply collected the tormas that were thrown out at the end of various pujas on a daily basis, once they had been offered on the shrine in the shrine room, and then he dried these and made soup of them. That was his food supply for about 10 years. It was his only source of food. Huh? He has reported to Khenpo Rinpoche that in fact this sort of soup is quite tasty. Because part of the torma has some embellishments made of butter. So the butter of Tibet, he told the Khenpo, is quite tasty. During the summers it was a bit difficult, because the butter, because of the warmer weather and so on, would go rancid, so not such a good taste. And so he was advised by a fellow student at the Monastic Institute of Buddhist Studies to boil this soup for a longer period in the summer, and then the rancid taste would go. All in all, during his lifetime, Professor Senpaji never went to a mountainous retreat, but in spite of not having done that, it is now evident in terms of how he passed away that he was a man of a high level of realization.
Then that choosing a manchane, Tawaka Juling shown a ray or the Tawaka Juling the one at the shop Pichiburo. Sasha Chiburo.
Tene?
Then it's a number of time gum towards the journey up yours.
And furthermore, Khenpo Rinpoche says most of the people or the majority of the audience here as to the summer course are individuals of Dakbo Kajiling in France, which is a secluded area and a very pleasant area, landscape-wise and otherwise. So Khenpo Rinpoche advises all of you to make use of the place where you're living and to focus as much as you can on meditating in terms of the explanations given here, as well as other instructions that you may have received regarding meditation practice.
Penna Salam Temple Petsa Lamachi in a young Tatum Kampachi Nayate Lamasu Nangadua.
You see, in terms of making progress, this is not something that sort of happens suddenly and easily. A practitioner has to be at it regularly and achieve familiarity with the meditation he's practicing. Now, even masters who are deemed to be individuals of high levels of knowledge and realization, even they continue to familiarize themselves to a greater and greater extent with the meditation in question.
Page Shubina Penna Jamgön Thaye Chashana.
An example here is the present Karmapa, Thaye Dorje, who every day primarily meditates. That's how he primarily appears to spend his time.
Penakazan Yongzi Sambajige, Godon Pechene, Chusel Nagrin, Dingens 20 Girius Segdoa.
2-3 days ago, he came from his residence to the Karmapa Institute in order to, I don't know how to phrase it, but in order to go to the residence of Professor Senpaji, and there he sat down and in the meditation posture and remained in that posture for about 5 hours in the presence of Professor Senpaji, now who then was still seated in meditation upon death. Upon his death. There isn't a single person who won't die. And to be able to die without regret should be the goal of any Buddhist practitioner. This is what one wants to achieve by making the efforts one makes. So it's in fact exceedingly important that people try to meditate. And in terms of doing that, it's not recommended to talk about it to others. There is no point in telling people, oh, I've been doing a 2-week retreat, or I have this and that in terms of meditation practice. It is not recommended at all. It's something private. One's personal practice of meditation is private, and it's recommended to keep it private. It shouldn't be a topic of discussion at lunch, for example. It's one of the most private things that there are. For example, Professor Senpaji, and Khenpo knew him for over 30 years. He has never heard him once say, "I meditate." However, it was quite evident that he did so to the Khenpo. This one can be aware of in the context of the nature of the conversations the man had with oneself and with then Khenpo Rinpoche and with other people, the way he lived and so on. Obviously, this was a man who focused on meditation practice, but he never said he did, not even once. What Yidam he meditated upon is not known by anyone but himself. No one ever saw him hold a rosary in his hand. He was not the type of person who would sit around on a chair in the garden while reciting mantras in public. Khenpo Rinpoche gives an example of another great recent Tibetan Buddhist master, Khenpo Ape of the Sakya school. Him as well, no one ever saw him with a rosary in his hand. It's not something that one runs around and waves with in one's hand in public, actually.
Actually, Khenpo Ape nge lama ten sare yuan rinpoche nyongde kundan sonda chi dorje tribu sayanda chöcha sayanda lame kupar sayanda ka kere yu.
So Khenpo Ape was someone Khenpo Rinpoche received teachings from as well and knew well, and he said once you got to his room in the house where he lived, there were no signs of dorje and bell and other ritual objects that would point to Khenpo Ape being engaged in meditation. Presumably he had a dorje and a bell and a rosary and so on, but usually Dadipa Kabenang la Shavijirva.
Dila Chang do I sugar shed Gongay Yorwa, Ungek Wotin Chagam Chindutina do Shagdo.
One puts that away when one has visitors. One doesn't keep those objects on a display for everyone to see, not at all.
Teaching Khenpo Yosala Shabjim Bindu, Jig Sugar, Lamsan Jasui, Kores Shilo Jumendo, Zambuno song in the Tedu, Tibuchi and Daruda, something that the Lado. Kingdom the yes and Nagado. Dang it, Damsig said the church drink tons on.
In fact, in terms of the Buddhist Tantras, there is the instruction to never publicly display ritual objects, your rosary, and so on. Now, once Khenpo Rinpoche quite urgently had to see Khenpo Ape, and he was brought to his bedroom, and presumably the attendant hadn't informed Khenpo Ape that a visitor was coming, and he had his dorje and his bell on his table and the rosary as well, and he said, "Oh, well, now you have set your eyes on these articles of Samaya of mine." However, no damage done because we're in accord with one another. There are no problems as to samaya between us. In fact, the rosary you use for reciting the mantra of your yidam is to be kept away from the eyes of any other person. And Khenpo is reported to once have said, if you insist of running around in public with a rosary in your hand, just get one for that purpose. And he had jokingly said to Khenpo, as you're a Khenpo of the cardio school, you might have to display a rosary in public, such as a class or so. For that purpose, get one for that purpose alone.
And
Khenpo also at the time of his passing, it became clear to everyone that this was a man of very high realization. So that's all for today.